on the Zero Hour. I'm your host, Richard RJ Eskow. Joining me once again is Professor Richard Wolff. He needs no introduction, especially to you guys at this point, but I'll give one. He's the host of Economic Update on Free Speech TV. He's a professor emeritus at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, visiting professor at New York University, and author of several books, the latest of which is The Sickness is the System. He is an economist as well as an economic historian, and he joins us now. So once again, Richard Wolff, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, RJ. Glad to be here.
We're always glad to have you. And here's what I wanted to talk to you about today. One of the enduring arguments, enduring arguments for capitalism that we hear all the time is that whatever inequalities it may generate or anything else, it is capitalism that harnesses human creativity. It's the engine of innovation. And without the chance to get filthy rich or, or something like it, or to become a billionaire, people would not create new inventions. They would not do great things, I suppose, in other fields as well. And so despite its shortcomings, if the people making this argument acknowledge them, it's the only way you're going to generate human progress. All human progress is attributable to capitalism and the impulses it provokes in people. So what's your reaction to that?
Well, my first reaction, to be honest, is amusement. It's so transparently designed to hype the benefits of the capitalist system by wild overstatement that the silliness alone of it is a chance to laugh. I would continue to laugh, except I know, and I know you know, that this kind of an argument is put forward all the time by people who don't know better and who need to celebrate capitalism, which is increasingly difficult to do. So if you can find something, however plausible or not, you're going to try. So let me respond in a number of ways. First of all, the argument is an enormous insult to human beings. It implies that the way you get progress is by buying it. In other words, the more money you give somebody who comes up with a technical breakthrough, the more likely that breakthrough will be made. In other words, money, private wealth is the great motivator. I mean, if you ever talk to Albert Einstein before he died, because it would be difficult.
Yes, I haven't tried since. Yeah,
right. Albert Einstein is widely credited as having made some of the greatest breakthroughs in physics, in astronomy, in a whole host of related areas. If you know anything about him, he did not do this because he would get wealthy. He did not, in fact, get wealthy from doing so. He was motivated by, let's see, what do psychologists call it? The desire to understand the world around you, the desire to share what you figured out with other people so that the whole human race can make an advance. Did Jonas Salk come up with the polio vaccine because it would make him a buck? Do we really want to go down that alleyway? Or let me do it the other way around. What capitalism has always been successful in is getting people to do what's profitable. But that is not the same thing as innovation. Innovation happens all over the place. It happens in people making music. It happens in people making art. It happens in people teaching other people. It happens, fill in the blank. In many of those areas, making private wealth is not part of the equation. I mean, let me give you my own profession. I'm an economist. I'm a professor of economics. No one is ever going to get rich by being a professor of economics. We're not paid enough to do that. We can live a reasonably comfortable life, but we're not going to be rich. And yet many of us do research, come up with innovative ways of understanding and thinking things. If you want to know how an economics professor might get rich, then you could say, well, one out of thousands and thousands of them might actually get a Nobel Prize. Last time I looked, the Nobel Prize in economics paid you about $900,000. Okay, that's a very nice prize. Very few economics professors ever get it. But we're not talking the kind of wealth that people who justify capitalism are talking about. No one is going to become a billionaire winning a Nobel Prize. No one ever has. We would believe, I think, that Nobel Prizes, whether they're in chemistry or physics or biology or in making peace or in economics, and they all have Nobel Prizes, by the way, those people are not doing it for the money, because the Nobel Prize, which recognizes the highest innovative achievement, isn't geared towards that. Here's an example of a kind of innovation that is profitable. If you can deliver packages faster than people used to be able to deliver a package, you can be Jeffrey Bezos. He's a delivery boy who made the delivery go faster. I'm glad he did. I think he deserves a pat on the back, maybe even a Nobel Prize for delivery speed. But what in the world are we doing giving him $200 billion of his own private money? Because remember, that's money not distributed in the society as a whole. And you know, if it were distributed intelligently, there would be millions of young Americans, for example, who would be transformed from the poor or mediocre education they're now given to a real opportunity to discover their geniuses, their talents, their capabilities. Who knows what innovations we might have gotten if we didn't give an absurd amount of money to a person who makes the package delivery go faster. Wow. Capitalism innovates, all right, but in very peculiar, very particular ways. It insults the human race by believing the rest of us are motivated in the ways that Elon Musk is, or that Jeffrey Bezos. And while I'm on Elon Musk, one last point. Anyone with half a brain who knows about the problems of modern fossil fuel consumption and what it is doing us, who knows that the private automobile kills more people than wars ever have in the United States, who knows that the pollution from private automobiles is a serious problem, that the waste of resources in building and maintaining. In other words, long story short, the modern transportation system we need is called mass transportation. Trains, trolleys, buses, those are the ways to much more cheaply and much more safely and much less dangerously in terms of health and welfare move our population. But we don't have mass transit in this country. What we are doing, thanks to Mr. Elon Musk, more than anyone else, is we're replacing the absurdity of the private gasoline-driven car with the second best alternative absurdity, the electric individual automobile. That's not the solution we want. It's the solution that's profitable. So innovation has gone to work to make an electric automobile rather than the amount of money that could have transformed our mass transit into a beautiful, fast, efficient mass transit system like they have in many other countries already. But we didn't do that. We didn't have the kind of innovation that would have been inspired by them. No, we do innovation if and when and to the degree it's privately profitable. And so we're all going to be killing each other with electric cars rather than with gas cars. And yeah, that's capitalism and its vaunted efficiency.
And don't you need to dig a lot of lithium for those cars and all sorts of other things? So, but a couple thoughts. One is, you mentioned Salk, Dr. Salk. There's also, of course, the people who invented insulin for diabetes, who gave it away for $1 each. I think they came to a total of $3. Inflation adjusted, to be fair, it'd be, what, $50 or something now. But, you know, and of course, they found a way to profiteer off that. But I do have to say before we go on, I think you were much too kind to Jeffrey Bezos, because if he ever got a Nobel Prize, it would be in exploiting working people and using every technological innovation possible, right? I'm trying to remember the name of this guy. I studied him in school, and unlike my classmates, was shocked, considered him a monster, but they were talking about him as the father of industrial.
Frederick Taylor.
Taylor, I knew it was Taylor. Yeah, Frederick Taylor. This guy would stand with the stopwatch and watching the, monstrous, I think. And Jeff Bezos, what he really gets a Nobel for is in taking that to a hideous extreme that, Taylor could have only dreamed about. But of course, he is a very good delivery boy. I'll give him that. I'll agree with you on that. But we should also talk, I think, about the ways in which government innovation has been polluted. That far from sponsoring or cultivating innovative ideas, sometimes government innovations have been corrupted, in my view. Of course, you made this.
I think the way I would get at that is many of the so-called innovations of capitalism have not, in fact, been discovered by capitalists, but they've been fundamentally created either in the university or, sorry about that. Give me an example. It's pretty well known that the computer was developed at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology during the war or in the aftermath of the war by government-funded university research, which does a great deal. And then the corporations who don't want to take the risk of invention, who don't want to set up expensive laboratories, hiring expensive scientists to do their thing for God knows how many years before anything marketable comes out of it. They love to push that which they won't do, which capitalism can't accomplish, onto a non-profit making enterprise like the government or like a university. Let them take the chances, let them expend public money to pay for it, and only if and when it is marketably profitable, then the capitalists come in, make a few adjustments, copyright or trademark, whatever the thing is, get a patent. It's a well-known system, been working for a long time. And so when you hear about, well, capitalism brought it to you. No, it didn't. It happened despite capitalism, because there was enough interest in the part of a researcher at a university or a funder at a government agency to make all of that happen. That part of the story is glibly erased in order to write a justification for capitalism. And I don't mean to be mean-spirited, but, if you're really going to just in a general way talk about it, well, then you'd have to also say that capitalism achieved the atomic bomb and dropped it in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And what does that tell you? What kind of an achievement exactly is that? or that the history of capitalism happens to coincide with two world wars, the most destructive activities in the human race that killed, I don't know, 50 to 100 million people directly and indirectly during the 20th century. Capitalism absolutely has ways in which it stimulates innovation across the board, good ones, bad ones, dramatic, not so dramatic, visible, invisible. But that's true of every other system as well. If you study medieval agriculture, which I've done, you will discover that some of the most important breakthroughs in understanding how to raise animals, how to grow crops under diverse circumstances were made by peasants across Europe, for example, as they were in other parts of the world. And here's the last one that I think is important to point out. For the first time in a century, the United States has a serious economic competitor. The Soviet Union never was economically competitive with the United States. Not at its beginning in 1917 and not at its end in 1989. Never came close. But the People's Republic of China has achieved this status. It is now the major global competitor of the United States, and it continues to grow 2 to 3 times faster than the United States, including in the first quarter of 2023 that it was just completed at the end of March. One of the things that is outstanding about the People's Republic of China economic achievements is their high-tech sector. They have been able to compete. That's why we have turned against the Huawei Corporation. That's why they have their own equivalent of Apple or Google or Cisco Systems or any of the other Silicon Valley giants. That's why there has to be subsidy of chips in the United States because they're producing microchips as well. In other words, they've managed to do what they're doing. They didn't need a private capitalist system. They have a hybrid, half capitalist, half state-owned and operated. It's a different system. They call it socialism with Chinese characteristics. I'm not arguing in favor of it or against it, but the notion that only capitalism a la the United States can be economically innovative, it's all made up. There's not a grain of truth to it. It's a desperate effort to justify a system that's having more and more trouble justifying itself.
If you'll bear with me to transition to our next topic, Richard, well, I'll just tell an anecdote. I won't take more than 60 seconds, I don't think. But so my wife and I were flying from New York to Los Angeles, or San Francisco, excuse me. She got upgraded to first class. I did not. We wanted to sit together. So when everybody was seated, she asked the flight attendant, was there any possibility of bringing me up front? The man sitting next to her said, I'll go back and trade seats with him, which, you know, if you know the difference nowadays, very generous thing for him.
Very much so.
Very kind. So he came back, traded seats with me. I went up front. When it came time for meals to be served, she said, Mr. X, I won't embarrass him by his name, what would you like for dinner? And I said, well, no, I'm not Mr. X. I traded seats with him. And she said, you're not so-and-so, so-and-so. And I recognized the name. Why did I recognize the name of this man? Because he, to a large extent, designed the way we experience computers and the internet today. He, as a researcher, doing pure research, he designed the way web pages are laid out, the way tabs are laid out, hyperlinks where, you know, you click on a word and it takes you to that. This is this guy. This is all this guy and his team's work, but he did it for the sake of the work. The people who learned from him didn't fly first class. They have their own planes, right? They're billionaires. Now, I'm not saying this guy didn't do well. Clearly he did. But to me, his act of generosity reflected what I'd read about him as a person, which is he was just very interested in what could be done and how it could make human life better. So so he's one example in transitioning to the internet. The other is that if we look at the internet as something that was developed by the federal government, right? The Defense Research Agency, DARPA, and so on, elements of a cell phone. Mariana Mazzucato has that map. The economists of all the pieces of the cell phone that are government developed. You could, in fact, argue, I would say, a counter argument that not only has capitalism not provided innovations in the internet, it has made it incalculably stupider and more destructive. The capitalist incentive has caused them to create things that distract and hypnotize and confuse us and make us waste our hours of this precious born earthly life doing dumb things. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I wanted to get into the internet, and now, of course, I don't want to get off on a huge AI tangent, but now that's going to be the next phase of it. People keep bringing up, you dismantled Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos pretty well, but the others that are idealized, Bill Gates and who got a government contract to develop his first operating. I mean, we could go on and on. It seems to me these people are little. They're just little people doing little stupid things and making us do them too.
Absolutely. I mean, I once had a professor of economics from an African country visit the department where I was teaching, and we got to know each other over lunches and so forth. And he one day just laid on me. He said, I just got another computer because of some deal between a computer company and the university, so that it was a little bit cheaper if you bought your computer through the university. And he said, this is a very complicated machine. 9/10 of what's in this machine, I will never have any opportunity to use or learn how to use. For the amount of money buried in this machine that is completely unnecessary for what I do, we could have had 1,000 simple machines that could have been distributed to high school and other students in my country. Among those students are geniuses. Among those students are people with all kinds of capability who could, had they been trained to use these computers, solved all kinds of problems, large and small, that afflict the millions of people in my country. But your system, your capitalism, has to be held accountable, not just for what it achieves, but for what it prevents. It so badly maldistributes what it does figure out that you can argue, and he did, that it does as much to hamper, to distort, to block, to delay innovation as it does to stimulate it. To be an honest assessment of the relationship between capitalism and innovation, you have to be aware of and take seriously and try to assess all the ways it blocks an innovation it's capable of. That it is so organized, we will destroy, trade in perfectly good computers and not give them to the people who could use them in a productive way for the same profit of the new company producing the new version, 90% of which I will never use, because it's a glitzy way to convince a bribable official at the university to replace 5,000 perfectly good computers with 5,000 that can do it a little faster, even though most of it the corruption is built into the system, but it afflicts innovation as well. So that the glib statement, look how much innovation it has, is a statement by someone who's very carefully hiding behind a screen all of the innovation blocked, thwarted, prevented, delayed by this same system.
In the minutes we have left, why don't we pivot a little bit and talk about what a creative system of innovation would look like. Well, I'm thinking of, for example, and this may seem left field, but I've always been fascinated by this quote from Marx. I think it was the afterward to the second edition of the first volume of Das Kapital or something. I don't know, but he used this phrase that gets translated as cook. I'm not going to make recipes for the cook shops of the future. But I got curious about that word, and I think it's garkuch or something, which means like hot food stand, right? It's even like a stall, right? So I think he was like responding with irritation to people who are saying, why didn't you figure out this or that little detail? But also implicit in it for me was, but there's going to be a way in the system that he envisions that is considered now to be totalitarian and stifling of human creativity. Clearly, he thought somebody would do that when the time came, right? Somebody would figure out all this stuff. Who does the hot food stalls? What's the best way to deliver hot food? I'm fixating on a weird detail, but it's my way of asking what a system dedicated to human well-being and flourishing might look like when it came to channeling creativity, encouraging creativity, and making it work. Does that question make sense to you?
Absolutely, but I think the classic answer of socialists has always been, first and foremost, redistribute the wealth, redistribute the means to give every family, every child, the best possible diet, clothing, shelter, education, free time, exercise, all the things that go into helping to mature the creativity that all human beings have. We don't do that. We condemn the vast majority of our people to a difficult life, paycheck to paycheck. You know what that means? It means you can't indulge your child's curiosity who wants to play with an old radio because he or she is fascinated by how it's put together, or has an attraction to animals, or whatever it is that emerges out of the uniqueness of each person. Give them the chance to discover what geniuses lie in them. Then we won't have one or two to give Nobel Prizes to. We'll have to create thousands of Nobel Prizes. We have no idea what kind of creativity would be possible if we really do that. One of the successes of the United States in the 19th and 20th century was it did open up a public education system. It wasn't enough. It wasn't good enough. It didn't get helped alongside of the diet and the housing and everything else a healthy child needs. But it was a step in the direction and got us a lot of the innovation we did. Capitalism's inability to distribute the wealth has held it back, as well as all of us trapped in this system, which is one of the impetuses, if I can say so, to say, as I do, we can do better than capitalism. There is no reason to accept the limits that capitalism imposes, let alone the boastful nonsense that those limits are not beyond anything we can do better than. Thank God slaves figured out they could do better than slavery, and serfs figured out they could do better than feudalism. Let's hope that we have a working class that can understand how and why and where and when we need to do better than capitalism, because that day is with us, heaven knows, as we watch, just as one example, $150 billion of American and European wealth being poured into a sinkhole of death and destruction in Ukraine, rather than being utilized to give the children of the Ukraine and the rest of the world the kinds of opportunity that those $150 billion could have given them to produce the innovations. You know, there's no defense of that once you understand the BS that capitalism now has to resort to, including that.
You know, as we close, you mentioned children, and you were talking about children, and I was thinking as you were talking that before children are sort of inculcated, have this system inculcated into them, right before they're programmed into it, they love to do creative things. They love to think of new things. They love to come up with new ideas because they have two characteristics. They have freedom, and they don't have to worry that their survival depends on doing something that pleases another. They, if they're lucky, obviously not all children live this way. They should, but they don't. But ideally, the way we think of childhood, you know, no parent would say, "Oh, that's a pretty picture," you know, to a 5-year-old. I'll give you $5 for it, or you know, I don't like that one. It's got too much red. I won't give you a nickel for it. It stinks, you know. But that's, you know, and we love that about children, and children do wonderful work as a result of it. So many, all of them, basically, and yet we drain that out of them and say, "Okay, now sort these pencils by length for the next 50 years, and maybe we'll give you enough to meet your fundamental needs," you know, or whatever it is, right? I mean, that's my closing thought. We can do better, and maybe we can learn from childhood as a time when human beings are growing and you know, reaching more of their potential. Maybe we can carry that forward. Maybe that's not a foolish thing to dream. Maybe that's a logical way to organize a society. What do you think?
I think we're at that point. I think we're at a point, which is why I like that you thought of this topic for today. We're at a point where the system is stifling the majority of people in it, and they know it. They feel it. They articulate it. They don't quite yet link it to the system, but they're getting even closer to that, which is why the old, stale, glib defenses of this system need to be confronted one more time to remove yet one more obstacle to people saying, "My God, we can do better than this. Why aren't we doing it? Do we really have to let Elon and Jeff come up with amusements to spend their billions while the rest of the world is suffering? Do we really have to celebrate such an abomination rather than shake our heads in disbelief that we and our fellow citizens ever allowed this?"
And on that note, Richard Wolff, economist, economic historian, professor, and writer and host of Economic Update. As always, a great pleasure speaking with you. And as always, thanks for coming on the program.
My pleasure too, RJ. Glad to have these chances.
Me too. And we will talk again soon, I hope. And we'll be right back after this. I'm Richard RJ Eskow, and this is The Zero Hour.